Okay, so in this session, we're going to go over a couple of things. So I'm going to start just giving a bit of background on this whole concept of metadata management and how we're kind of defining it as a term going forward. And then I'm going to get Olav to come up here, and he's going to give some background on some of the guidance and documentation we have available. Jason is going to go over a assessment tool that he's designed to help us actually figure out, what some of these problems are. And then we're going to invite Sam and Elmarie to come up here respectively, just to talk about some of their use cases. So we have an experience sharing from Lao about what they've done with their system. It's been there for a very long time. Sam will cover the timeline with you. And also from South Africa and Zambia, Melissa and Elmarie will come up and share their experience from there. And if we have a bit of time, we'll go through some Q&A. And once again, as I mentioned, anyone online, please feel free to join that link on the community of practice and post your questions there. All right, so just so I can kind of put us on the same page in terms of what actually constitutes a metadata issue, right? So we have kind of clear things that we kind of associate with metadata. These configuration challenges, duplications of category options, problems with geography, something wrong with an option set that causes it not to load. Okay, these are kind of the classic examples that we'd probably associate. But then we also have procedural challenges that are not optimized. So for example, naming conventions, problems with indicators, either duplicate indicators or indicators with the wrong formula, issues with user roles, groups, and sharing, incorrect use of production, development, and training systems. And a lot of these are linked to kind of overall policies and procedures that are just not implemented very well and lead then to a number of subsequent problems in the system, right? We'll cover some examples as we go through this. But just so we can be on the same page, it's not just about the configuration, because often a lot of these procedures and principles lead to these issues that we see later on down the track, especially when we're looking at systems that have been built over a very long span of time. All right, so some brief background in terms of what caused us to focus on this a little bit more, right? So we know it's very easy to customize DHIS2, either through the user interface or just using the API or something else, right? We can bring in metadata quite easily and modify the configuration, and that's by design. But then we should associate some procedures with that in order to contain this a little bit, right? So we now see implementations increasing over size. Implementations have been going on for many years, 10 years, 15 years or more. Okay, and there's not as much consideration actually made in terms of this long-term system management, system maintenance over time. We also see that in some systems that we work with, there's a lot of administrators in the system, and whether or not they should have that level of access, sometimes it becomes a little bit political who has that access. And then, they're able to make these modifications in the system, and then this can cause some challenges later on down the track. And as a result, we see the configuration quality kind of degrading over time and being very difficult then to subsequently manage. All right, and so what can this cause, right? And you guys probably have some idea based on your own implementations, right? I just listed 3 categories of users, but you can think of some other issues as well. Okay, but for the end user, this really causes some havoc in actually reviewing the data. And that's the whole purpose of getting the data into the system. But when we have this very poor configuration challenge, then we can't really create the outputs we need. Sometimes they can't find what they need easily. Sometimes they don't even have access to what they should be having access to create the items that, for whatever charts and maps that they're working with. There's also a lot of challenges with data quality. So in particular, as a configuration is updated over time, you might have old data sets or old tracker programs or whatever it might be, and you're not able to get, access to that legacy information for whatever reason. And you have problems then with your consistency of your data because there's multiple concepts represented by different things. And it just becomes very difficult to actually use that data the way it's meant to be used. Then for admins, there's also another problem, right? They have all kinds of extra metadata maybe that they have to deal with. There's all kinds of challenges when upgrading DHIS2 versions. Just in the other room, for anyone involved in the kind of this tracker at scale session, they were saying a DHIS2 upgrade should not be a big deal. But we all know that this is a problem, right? It leads to many problems when in practice when we're working with it. So basically what we've kind of done is separated out these working with this metadata into 2 pieces. One is reactive, and that's probably what many of us are used to, right? We see a problem later on down the track, and we try to figure out what's going on and fix it, right? It's our most kind of common case. And then we have this proactive issue, which is, where we can try and deal with this more procedurally. That's some of the other issues I identified through procedures, through training, through implementation support, right? And we're seeing this come to fruition a little bit more and more as we go down the track, but we're really still seeing this first part being kind of quite problematic. So when we're looking at this reactive process, what are we actually reviewing? So we're trying to review the quality of a specific implementation's quality, of their configuration, right? And this is kind of a very wide-ranging definition. Okay, but the idea is to break down this process into smaller components so we can actually figure out what we need to do, right? So what do we need to actually fix? What is wrong with our system? Do we have something we can either quantify or measure or check, right? Rather than just saying everything is broken, we need to fix the system. So we have a couple processes that we've introduced, okay? One is the data integrity check, as it's called. Put metadata in brackets here, okay? The other is the metadata assessment report, and Jason's going to introduce that. It's a new tool that he's helped us to produce. And the other is a manual review, okay? So we do have some tools to help, but some things, especially when it comes to policies, procedures, things like naming maybe, okay? Some human intervention is required to really check this and make sure it's correct. So the data integrity check, for those of you who are familiar with this tool, okay, runs through a number of different checks. And actually, Jason and Olav and some of the team are working on kind of refactoring this to make it perform a little bit better. For anyone who has worked with it, some of you, it might not even work in your system, for various reasons. It causes a lot of problems as it is right now, but hopefully this can be changed in the future and, it will run a little bit better. Jason, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, no, we'll get into this more. I mean, I would say even that I think this mic works, yeah. This functionality has been there for some time, but it's kind of misnamed. It's not really data integrity, but what we're talking about here is metadata integrity, which are a little bit different. But we'll get into more the nitty-gritty details of what we've done up to this point and where we're going to go in the future.
Okay, and then this is just some screenshots from this assessment tool that Jason has developed. It does use R at the moment. He will talk about it more, demonstrate it, and give you a bit more background. But we've been trying it out in some places. We've shared it with some of the HISP groups to try it out as well, and found some very interesting results from this. But Jason will discuss this in more detail. Okay. And then we also have a lot of manual review processes. Some things it's really hard to kind of pick up via a script or some type of tool. I've listed one example here that might be different just because, the English spelling is completely different. These are our category option combinations, our lovely mouthfuls of terms. Okay, and you can see here, we basically have 2 duplicates of 5 years and above. That type of stuff is kind of hard to detect because the spelling is completely different. And, there's various reasons that it might be hard to detect, right? So sometimes manual review is required. So here's an example of an assessment, and I think actually this is from Olav's work, focusing on kind of the analytics portion, right? And this is where, you can run into some challenges from an end user perspective. This is an example here. We had so many dashboards, over 6,000 dashboards. Nearly half of them had nothing on them, right? Just blank dashboards. About 90% of them were just private, so no one could even see them other than the person who made them. You just had a very small proportion shared with actual users. Right? And their use was very limited. And then there were, all kinds of other issues with the public favorites, with data element groups, despite there being so many. You can see here, nearly 14,000 data elements, nearly 4,300 indicators, right? So there's just an overwhelming amount of information to then filter off. And, a lot of this could be solved by fixing sharing, for example. But it, as it is right now, it's very hard to find what you need. How will you find the dashboard you need? How will you find the data element or indicator you need to actually create the outputs that you want, right? So we can see how this kind of configuration is not a best practice in terms of also our analysis, which is really where we want to have some impact on. And then as a second example, this is more from the administrator side, just reducing the amount of actual pieces of metadata that has to be dealt with. So in this scenario, we actually just kind of blew up the database and started over. And reduced everything as much as we could to the point, where about 50% of everything was basically gone. And this just made things a lot easier for users to work with, right? And also from the administrator perspective, you're not then managing all this unnecessary metadata basically and having to figure out what you need to do with that. All right, so I posted some resources here and Olav will come up and go over that in a moment. But then we have the second process, right? This is our kind of proactive process. And, this has been a challenge, of course. So when we talk about things like core teams or building capacity and things of that nature, at least for the last 2 years or so, where it's been remote, it's been particularly difficult to build configuration capacity. And I think we all have some sense that that's going on. But this is actually a bit beyond, just how to configure inside DHIS2, because that has also created some trouble. Because it is so easy to train people to make changes inside of DHIS2, and then we often give a lot of people permission to do that without really kind of thinking about the long-term ramifications of what that causes, then, we see some of these issues that I'm kind of mentioning here, right? So we get a lot of people who know how to add data elements, indicators, things of that nature, right? But then, we don't have a lot of coordination, for example. Maybe people are working on forms, but there's a lot of administrators. They're not talking to each other, and you get a lot of duplicates in your category options. So things of that nature are much more from the procedural side and are not really discussed in as much detail as they could be, right? So this is really what we're trying to improve on a bit. Now we have some examples available. We're really trying to work on this. We're really happy to receive feedback, particularly on this area, because, we're still kind of outlining how we can work together to do better on this. And this is, as I said, beyond just updating the configuration, right? So you're assuming that people have generally a strong command of already, working with DHIS2, either through the API or through the user interface to add or configure metadata. But what you're not making the assumption is that they're doing it correctly, right? They can do it, but what's actually the effect on the system itself. All right, so there's a couple of resources here of examples that we're working on, SOPs and some training exercises and things that we've done with some countries that you can access here. So I'm going to ask Olav to come up. Just go over some of the documentation that we have available.
Yeah, so I'll just give a very quick overview of what we currently have sort of documented in this area in our documentation before handing over to Jason, because I think it might not be so easy to find always what we put there. So hopefully you're familiar with the sort of overall DHIS2 documentation page. And within the implementation section of the documentation, which we've organized over the last few months, we have been starting to improve the documentation around the metadata integrity and quality. So how do you assess, how do you improve metadata? So we have a lot of stuff which is almost ready to be put there. So in the coming month, there will be more new stuff here. But what we have so far is this overview, which is quite new, which covers a lot of the things that Shurajit talked about in terms of the reactive stuff for the moment. So we have some introduction, and then we have started on some guidance around how do you manually review your metadata configuration. So what are some of the things you should look at? For example, naming, how do you verify your indicator definitions, looking at some of the duplicate metadata objects, verifying your sharing settings, for example, which we've started documenting here. So that's sort of the first part. And then the next part is more like a user guide for what Jason will present in a few seconds with this new metadata assessment tool. So on the documentation page, we essentially have an introduction showing a bit how the tool is used or what it's used for. Sort of the installation part of it is on GitHub together with the tool. And then we have basically pulled out all the different metadata metrics and recommendations that are embedded in the tool here as well, so that you could sort of review this manually. So in the different areas, like looking at the aggregate data elements, we have the different checks. Yeah, looking at data elements that are not assigned to any org units, which is a sign that they're not actually being used for any data collection. what is the recommendation, etc. So all of that is documented here, so that it can sort of be used independently of the tool that Jason will be presenting. That was it. So if you're interested, keep an eye on this, and we'll be adding more stuff that we have almost ready in the coming weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Olav. So you've seen a little bit about, and I'm sure, who has used the data integrity checks in DHIS2? Yeah, some people. Have you had problems with it? Yeah. The current checks are written in Java. So basically everything is in memory. You've got that has advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage being that on very large systems, this can consume a huge amount of memory and really slow the machine down. There's a couple different problems with it that we've tried to address. And what I'm going to show you today, just very briefly, I'll go through. We haven't added these to the main slide deck, but we've tried to put together. We've collected a lot of these kind of problems over the years. Things that were in the data integrity checks and things that we had developed based on experience in the field, based on JIRA tickets, based on what people have fed back to us about what are problems. So we tried to combine a lot of that knowledge that we've assembled over the years into a common set of checks that would be applicable across, in addition to what's there, but across all DHIS2 instances. We have rewritten most of these checks in SQL. One of the reasons that DHIS2 was using these kind of Java-based checks previously was that we were not bound to any specific database. Now we're only supporting Postgres, so it became a lot easier for us to implement these checks directly at the database level as opposed to relying on Java to do the checking. One of the other issues that we tried to address, as you noticed from what Olav had presented, was some additional guidance as well. If you've used the data integrity checks, it tells you like, you know, you've got this problem, but you may not really even understand what the problem is or what is the impact of the problem. And if you do have this problem, what do I do about it? How do I go about rectifying it? So we've tried to include also some descriptions and guidance as to, you know, what is the actual impact of having a duplicate category option? Is that something I should worry about? What if my geometry is invalid for an organization unit? What is the actual impact of that? Similar to the previous version, or the current, really, yeah, the previous version, current version, I'll get to that in a minute. We've included the ability to see the details. So, you know, when you get these duplicate organization units, maybe that have the same name, you'd like to be able to see exactly which ones they are so that you could go back into the system and then rectify that. Most of what I'll show you today has already been integrated into the core. We're missing a front end. We've got a kind of hacky front end at the moment that we've written in R Markdown. But this is available from 237 or 238. I'm not exactly sure which version, but hopefully over the coming months, then we'll get a front end on top of what is available through the API. So for now, what we have written is in R, using R Markdown, we've kind of given you the ability to run this metadata assessment locally. You could even automate this on a server if you wanted to. It's not that difficult. If you have some experience using R Markdown, you can basically install everything on your laptop, include the credentials to a DHIS2 server, and then the R Markdown report will upload all the necessary metadata as SQL views, run through all the SQL views, and what you get back is a report, essentially. The idea being eventually that all of this would be done through the native DHIS2 user interface through an app as opposed to this R app, basically. Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind that this was really meant to be a proof of principle. The implementation team, Olav, myself, Nick, worked very closely with the backend development team to implement the solution. So they handled all of the wizardry of how to do it inside of Java, and then we tried to write all of the guidance and the SQL to identify these metadata problems. So in terms of the actual report, all of this is available on GitHub, and really the only thing that's required, and I won't go into the details here, but again, if you are familiar with R Markdown, you should be able to easily reconfigure this yourself. But all we do basically is to set some URL and username and password. This can be set inside of a local profile, and then you execute the report. This can really be any arbitrary server. We've run it against, I don't know, half a dozen or so actual DHIS2 instances. There are some limitations on versions. That's one of the problems with SQL, is that if there are database level changes, then some of the SQL which we've written doesn't work, basically. But we will work closely with the development team to keep all of these checks up to date. So going forward, from roughly 236 is where we started, and that's what this version of the report is based on. But going forward, we will keep these up to date with the development team, basically. So just to show you how it works, inside of your local R Studio or whatever you're using to create the report, we can just hit knit, and then we should get the report. Runs relatively quickly. There are some checks that run very slowly, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But basically what we get back then is a listing of all of potential problems. And what we tried to indicate here is a general theme, like categories, what the particular issue is. Here we've got a category option with no categories. So, that's probably not really a big problem. That's why we've also tried to indicate what the level of criticality is. Warning, like, this is probably not really a big problem, but it's probably not something you want hanging around in your system either. Sorry. In addition to that, then a relative percentage, just to give you an idea of the total number of category options, how many of these violate this integrity check. And then we could even get down to the details. This will download a CSV file, which you can save to your local machine. And then this allows you to go back and like weed these out of the system, basically. How do I want to resolve this? Because you may not always be able to make a decision directly as to what you want to do with this. Some of these are a lot more difficult, like category options with more than one membership for a category. I'd have to read the guidance to understand exactly what that is. It's there. But what we've seen is that a lot of times you have data attached to these pieces of metadata, basically. So you can't resolve the problem right away. You may have to go back, consult with the programs, consult with other people to determine, how are we going to go about resolving this. One of the other things that we included in this report that we will hopefully include in the DHIS2 front-end app when we get it is some profiles on users, because this is part of what Olav was discussing in terms of standard operating procedures. As you can see here, number of users who have super user. I'm not sure that this is correct because this is from the play server. We'll have to check the code, but we have seen this in other systems where, even if you go through and fix all of these problems, if you've got 75 people that have super user access, then very likely you're going to go back and revert to a state where you've got chaos in the database. So it's not enough just to fix it, but you've also got to think about other things in terms of who actually has the ability to alter the metadata. Yeah, and we've included some other pieces for, to give you an idea, particularly about disabled users. How often are people logging in? How long since they have logged in? And in addition, this is what Olav had showed you, but this is kind of integrated into the report itself. That we've got the level, the number of issues, and then some description in terms of a recommendation about what to do. We haven't got to the point where we've actually given you a solution. Like, how do I actually fix this? Like categories without a category option. Well, that one's relatively straightforward, probably, because you can go into the maintenance app and delete these extraneous category options. But in many cases, like what is the one that's, yeah, category option combinations with disjoint associations. It's a hard one to explain, but basically this happens when you create a category combination, you get a category option combination, and then you alter the category combination. So you maybe add another category. You end up in the system with male, let's say male under 15. You add another category called, I don't know, something else. Yeah, HIV positivity. Yeah, HIV positive and negative, for instance. So then what happens, the system creates a new category option combination, male less than 15, HIV positive, HIV negative, but it's still associated with the old category combination. This can be very, very difficult to resolve because you may have data attached to that. So we tried to indicate, you know, in general, what is the recommendation, but what we haven't given you is some like magic wand to fix the problem. That's kind of the next step. I did just lastly also want to show you, if I can get rid of this, go back to the screen. This is Jan, is the developer that worked with me on this, and he did a great job documenting this in this particular ticket, 10763. And let's see, just to show you that this has been integrated into the core actually. So all of the checks that we ran through R that were developed in SQL have been integrated into the DHIS2 core. And you can see we've got things like legacy. These are the Java-based rules, because a lot of those, we can't do everything in SQL. Determining whether a program rule is valid is something that is probably not for mere mortals to write SQL for. So some of these we have to do programmatically inside of Java. Some of them, however, are not. But this is where this is going to show up. These are going to show up inside of this data integrity endpoint, basically. And then eventually, when the front end team gets some time, they will put a nice little app around this. So we may have a mix between the SQL-based tools, checks that could also be run directly on your database, as well as these Java-based checks that are still going to be in the system. Great. I think that's all I had. Any questions, or I'll turn it over to the next presenter. Sorry? You can just go to that endpoint, API data integrity. If you just want to run it on the API, yeah. But I would definitely suggest, if you're running a later version of DHIS2, that you consult the documentation. One of the big advantages now is that you can run these checks independently. You don't have to run all of them. That was one of the problems with the previous version, is that you had to run absolutely every one, and that could put a big strain on your system. But you may only want to run, like, I'm going to deal with this problem today. So I'm going to run this check, and I'll try and fix it. I'll go back, I'll run that same check again, rather than having to run everything. Yeah, the entire report, basically. Yeah. So if you can blame me, it was kind of my call, right? Quite honestly. And we can debate about this, you know, and we tried to feel, basically critical was like, this is very likely going to cause an error in the system. As an example, invalid organization unit geometry can actually cause the analytics engine to fail. So that can happen. And there can also be other situations where the metadata misconfiguration can actually cause an error. So those types of really, really problematic things were like, you need to fix this right now. But this is very arbitrary. Some things might be, you know, those critical things probably we shouldn't really debate about. Like, those need to be fixed. Other levels of warning, like you go down, we also have information. These are things that shouldn't be, that don't need to be fixed, but are there for, you know, your own information, number of organization units, for instance. That's not a problem per se. Warnings were meant to be like, it might be an error, so you should take a look at it. But I would take those levels of criticality with a grain of salt. But generally, things that are critical, I would say definitely need to be fixed. Things that are warnings are like, you better take a look at it, but it may not necessarily lead to any problems. But yeah, if we need to go back and review that, if people have strong feelings about it, then we can certainly, you know, think about maybe changing that classification. Probably not. Probably not. I don't think that this would be compatible with anything below 236. No. Yep. Well, I don't even think 2.39. Maybe I haven't even spoken with the front end team yet. So that's TBD, I think, as they say at this point. Yeah. I'm gonna maybe not take your question and allow the next. Okay. Okay. Right. It definitely can be run through the API and schedule. I think what the piece that we're missing is the front end to be able to visualize it. That's the piece that's missing. But in terms of actually being able to run the checks and view them through the API, that part's done. The part. Right. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah.
Hello. Hello. It's okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So my name is Samaykham. You can call me Sam. I work for HISP Vietnam, but based in Laos, and also supporting Laos to do the implementation of DHIS2, and also coordinate with HISP Vietnam team if Lao MOH need any support or any implementation support, like training, or especially the cleaning or maintaining of the database. So, okay, I'll just sharing this experience, because Lao has been using DHIS2 for almost 8 or 9 years now. So just a brief background so you understand where we are coming from and why do we need that. So we started using DHIS2 since 2014. So basically we started with mostly just aggregate. So we have like MCH, IPD, OPD, then MCH. We also have many programs like ANC, delivery, nutrition, EPI. And then we also, in 2016, Mali also would like to join. So they also join with using aggregate and events. Also, we expand with HIV. And as you see, we were using aggregate for a couple of years, just for us to know or to understand and get comfortable with DHIS2 first. So we start simple, we use aggregate, and then once we are comfortable, we introduce a tracker.
Sorry, give me just a minute. We
Okay,
need to share your screen.
Oh.
No, it's you had your presentation through Zoom, right?
No, it's just this.
There. Yeah.
Okay, maybe you can go back one more. Yep. Okay, no, it's a problem. So maybe I'll just talk a little bit about this. So in 2017, we introduced the second instance, because we figured out it's better to separate between tracker instance and then aggregate instances. And also in 2020, we have another instance specifically for COVID. So just for the performance and all. So as you can see, we've been using this a lot, and there are many programs. So for now, we have almost 9 health programs using this throughout the countries. And the country, the population is around 7 million people. Yeah, so as you can see, we have many programs, and the first mistake we made, or not really a mistake, so we were really excited to have many programs to see data. So we made everything public. And then we later figured out we should not do that. And not everyone would like to see everything, especially user at the lower level, that they just want to see that program, and maybe the higher level or central level, they should be able to see. So that's the first thing that we found, that once we have many programs, we need to better organize. So then we have some, for example, the data sets. So the data set we used in 2014, once we have, because it's based on the paper. So once they get used to DS2, they know how DS2 work. Sometimes the form should be updated to use the new technology. So that's why we have several data sets that need to upgrade, especially the MCH. We have moved it to 2.0, and also EPI, that we made another data set, especially for EPI. And using that, we made many new categories. Then some categories is not relevant anymore. We also introduced new options, and sometimes many programs need to use same option, but we created more, especially like genders or sex and this kind of thing, or the age groups. So those are the things that we created. And then because of new program choice as well, we also try to limit the sharing, also the settings, and also other things like indicators. Now we have the sharing indicators, some like populations, we have many versions of the population, and so on and so forth. And the last one is also, we also needed to upgrade the DS2 software or version, because we did not upgrade every version. So we just find the right one, and then we do the upgrade. And I can say that the problem we have is more on the try to balance between the design and the speed. Sometimes some program they would like to roll out as fast as possible, so we didn't have enough time to test everything or to plan how we would like to make the program. So it's also kind of a dilemma. We need to choose that we can have a good design, but also we need to roll out as fast as possible. So that's why we have so many things that we need to clean up afterward. So this is the approach that we took. So we didn't have the tool at that time, and we're excited maybe to try the tools. So at that time, we were just did the assessment. So we put everything in the blueprint. So we download all the schema or the structure in the blueprint, the Excel, make it out the blueprint, and then in the blueprint, we have different sheet for everything. So just for example, the metadata, indicators, another sheet. We'll show you another example in the next slide. So once we have the blueprint, then we sit with the MOS and define each one that, for example, which users should see what and which kind of data they should see, or who should see those kind of data, which dashboard they should see, or the admin level, what they should be able to see. So once we have the kind of okay blueprint, then the dev team will try to convert that blueprint into the script so that they can apply into DHIS2. And then we also define the test cases, and then try to run the case and validate if is what we need, what we want to have, and also invited MOS staff to do the test. So all of this we did it in a separate server. We had another server for development. So we did the test, we evaluate, and then we adjust the blueprint, and also try to make the blueprint okay before we apply that into the production. So this is just the example of the blueprint that we use. So from the column D is what we just pull out from the database. So this is what we have, and then who can see at the moment. And then from the column E to F is the new things. Or for example, this one, new user group, which user group should see this, and then we kind of try to define, and then using the script to make this to the DS2 configuration. And I think this is the last slide. So we have done this a couple of times. So since 2014, so we did one back then when we were using 2.2 27. So these are all the lessons we've learned so far. So the first challenges is about to train. So because once we update or especially the new version or anything, we do anything with the database, we need to, if not training, we need to prepare the document to send to the user. So especially at the district, when they see something different from what they used to see, then they will ask what happened and all. The second is also about the planning. Like I mentioned, when we were preparing the blueprint, we spent a lot of time defining and also getting everything and talking to different programs to get it right. And also labor intensive, our core team or developer team also working hard to make the script. Once they make the script, they also have bug, and then they also try to fix it. And the last one, even though we test and we done many testing, but there's still bug after that. So once we apply in the production, there was still some bugs. So also need to prepare to fix those bugs. So those are the challenges, but the lesson learned with what we have done that we would like to share. So the first one is also about just to make the documentation properly. So to document every step. So we once we done the cleanup, we can tell to the user what have we done and what are the new changes. Then the timing is also important because most of the time we need to make sure that after we clean up, we don't need to use data to make the report, or not big report is coming. So make sure that you plan that, because there will be some bugs and you will not know. So make sure that you don't, after you did the upgrade, then you don't want to use it. You can have some time for testing to fix that, and then and also take advantage of the long holiday. So like, I'm not sure in other countries, but Laos, we have usually a Lao New Year, so it's quite long. So we took that opportunity to upgrade the server and also to do the cleanup. And maybe I skip that one. And the last one, from the experience, we didn't delete anything, so we just try to keep it, but we also just to move it to a different group and then make it private, nobody should see, or we just add some prefix so it doesn't show on top. And then we also try to keep backup before and after the cleanup. Yep, and I think that's all for the share. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah. So, I think this is a good illustration from a country implementation perspective about how do we keep things clean. So, what we saw in the metadata integrity report is how do we identify things when it's not clean, but we saw some great examples there of, through standard operating procedures and discipline, how do we maintain the integrity of the database? Now we'll let Elmarie set up. Were there any questions for the previous speaker? Yeah, one in the back. We can give you a mic.
Thank you. This is just more of an implementation thing. What is the timeline and a budget for this, and how often do you recommend doing this? Over.
Are you talking about the
Review of the metadata, cleaning up, and how often and then how to maintain consistency across instances?
Yeah. I don't know. Nick and I have some stories from a country that we will go unnamed, where we spent a lot of time. Where's Olav? He disappeared. Yeah. It's really hard to say. I would say, depending on where you are in the implementation, if you're in the early stages, I think implementing things like, standard operating procedures, dev, testing, staging, production type of implementation, never doing anything through the user interface, scripting absolutely everything, you know, some of the guidance that we've included, that's your best bet. If you've been running an instance for 10 or 15 years, that's probably going to be a very different situation. So I don't know if we really can answer that. I would say that, you know, it's a bit, you will not be able to solve all of these problems in one day. But I think, you know, you can start chipping away at it and determining, you know, what is the most crucial and what is maybe not the most crucial. Nick?
So yeah, like Jason said, you know, in terms, when we've done this with ministries and presented the plan, they're quite, you know, taken aback by the length of time that we propose, you know, and Sam said he did it over a holiday, but I think there was probably a lot of background preparatory work. You know, it takes a bit of time, and it's also a bit dependent on the country capacity for this one, because it really requires them, all those lists, all those blueprints, you know, you really ideally need approval from them before you start fiddling with things. Now, sometimes we're not so good at getting that. You know, we kind of say, oh, this is best, let's just do it. But ideally, you would want, you know, some of those inputs. So, you know, yeah, I think it is a bit hard to say, but we could probably document a bit more, because we do have quite a few countries where this has been done to some extent. These guys will share another story, an example. So it could probably provide a bit more inputs in terms of, it's different, but we could probably come up with some inputs that would allow you to come up with some estimate or some type of calculation, you know, to do it a little bit better. So that's a great idea, I think, that we could pursue a bit more. So thank you. Yeah.
Okay, we can save some more time for discussion at the end. I'll turn it over to Elmarie now.
Okay. All right, thank you. And just to acknowledge our attendees online as well, I am Melissa Andrews, the Digital Transformation Manager for HISP South Africa, and I'll be presenting with Elmarie Claasen, who is our Engineering Manager for HISP South Africa. And we're just going to go through some lessons learned while implementing DHIS2 in Southern Africa. So, yep. Oh, we're not going. Unless we're on another screen.
Okay, cool. No?
This is on your laptop, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so we'll be focusing on best practices specifically in implementation in South Africa, listing those best practices, and then really focusing on the impact on Southern Africa and those surrounding countries. Elmarie then will go through the rapid assessment that we've conducted as well within just some of our experiences as well in Zambia. Obviously, as usual, there are always some recommendations. So our best practices within South Africa were really a combined effort which we've had with the Ministry of Health. And I'd love to acknowledge both our members here today, Ms. Mbaladi Volmerine, so then also Mr. Mbalelo Mkambuka. So thank you very much for being present. And I'm sure if there are any specific questions around implementation in South Africa, they would be more than willing to take them as well. So when we're looking at just some real understanding of lessons learned or best practices, we're always starting at our minimum data set creation. So in South Africa, we've got a periodic update of our national indicator data set, which we then normally just shorten to NIDS, and it happens every 3 to 5 years. And our indicator to data element ratio is quite healthy. It's about 1 to 1.8. We also then work with a technical working group, and we really involve quite a lot of partners. So it's not just one person making this decision around what would be important for us as a country. Through that technical working group, you have customization, which needs to happen. That customization is normally done 6 months before implementation. And the reason being, so you can train people, but also make sure that you've got this longitudinal data also then just updated as well. During that 6-month period, we're looking at printing, making sure that you're actually training your health staff as well. So within that period, we've got our preparing our registers. And, you know, you'd think that is a bit strange, but obviously we know sometimes how it is when you're printing registers or some issues that you were experiencing. So we really do focus on those as well. For us specifically, we're looking at our population figures being then provided to us by Statistics South Africa. I'm sure every country who's presented here as well, you've got your national body that provides you with your levels of information. We utilize our district populations, and previously what we had was that the Stats South Africa then was only able to provide us with local municipality data, and that was then excluding metros. So in our last iteration, we've actually then been working a lot closer with Stats SA to be able to provide us with that data. And that's sort of coming online quite officially. We then use a crude methodology to establish this facility population. And then we've also developed an app specifically then to assist us with that in DHIS2. So in moving along to another important key sort of principle, and I think we've already discussed that at length as well, would obviously be your metadata management and naming conventions, making sure we actually all agree on naming conventions, keeping it standard, making sure we're just within that process. Integrity checks. Our integrity checks then, if you're also checking just the picture on the other side there, normally it would be 0, and you'll notice then that there are zeros there. One of the most important things, I think, if you're ever in the M&E space or research space, our attention to detail. If you're not going to be very attentive to detail, then, I mean, it is a bit of a lost cause. So I'll hand over to Elmarie and I'll take us a bit further into meat of things. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. And then just for us to continue. So what is really naming convention practices? Really, it depends on every country. We're not saying that you must name certain things in a specific way, as long as you have a guideline for good naming practices to name the same thing consistently so that people understand what it is. And then pay attention to spelling, because if you make spelling mistakes, you often get duplicates. Double spaces between words and those type of things are just small attention to detail. Nora's bugbear, never ever use number of or percentage of in front of a data element or an indicator. I'm so sure, Nora, you're very happy for us to say this. It's sort of redundant. You are reporting in aggregate data, you are reporting numbers, so you don't have to say it's a number of something or a percentage of. The other thing is that if you do that, then when you're on your analytics side, everything is sorted starting with number of, instead of starting A, B, C, D, but everything will start with N or P. So that just helps. And we often get those things from programs with a number of, and we often help then just to reword those more appropriately for them. Usually these things are very important to ensure that we also match previous indicators with new indicators so that you get that longitudinal indicator report. Then on master facility management, it's important to maintain a master facility list as one point of truth for facilities where different systems draw from, and to use a standard naming convention in that. Approval of any facilities before they are being used, or to any changes to the master facility list is important. And again, attention to detail with spelling, to the use of GIS coordinates, and to review that they are correct. So in South Africa, we first managed the master facility list in DHIS for a while, but it is now managed in another location, but we still as a registry, but we still use one source of truth for the master facility list. Then on user management, we had long and hard headaches on trying to understand what would be the best way for us to manage our users. So we decided to define user roles and user groups based on function and not on position. So in other words, we don't say that you're a data capturer and therefore you can enter data and you should clear your cache and you can see reports. We rather create those multiple roles like data entry, aggregate data entry, tracker data entry, clear cache, and those, and we allocate multiple roles to one individual, and then also user groups. We find that works easier for us to not have too much confusion about what the user roles are that we need to have. We have a policy in place to discourage staff saving passwords in their browser. There are really a lot of cybersecurity focus that we have, and it's very easy for your database to be hacked if you save your password in a browser. So it's not an easy thing to do that, but at least for our HISP staff, and we're rolling that out to government as well. The user access to DHIS is only granted through a registration form approved by the person's manager, and that registration form is also loaded into the system on your in the DHIS, and then when we do audits, we can actually retrieve that form and say, why does Melissa have a specific role and who approved that, and we can understand that. We have a password expiry date set to 3 months, and accounts not being used after 3 months are automatically disabled. It's nice that there's now a task scheduler that we could do that through. We previously just did it with a script that ran, but we will use that clearly now. We also do monthly user reviews, so the user form gets printed out. Every district must review their users monthly and sign off those users that they should still be valid users that should have access to the system. And they must disable users who resigned from their service. So when the Auditor General comes and audit the system, they would, for instance, ask the HR who resigned, and they ask us to prove that we have actually disabled them shortly after or on the day that they have actually resigned. So those are important things, that you don't continue to give people access who might be actually cross with you, that why they have left your employment, and you need to stop their access. The two-factor authentication is something that we are trying to implement as good principles of authentication. One issue that we have is that not all users has feature phones to be able to scan a QR code from an app. So we would really like to see how can we perhaps have an email option for email or an app verification. So the key part here is to have standard operating procedures for user access to health information systems, and our Auditor General strictly audits the department for this. And really, we don't have findings on user management. So these are very good practices. In terms of WAR upgrades, we have developed an internal testing protocol, which looks like a bit like the picture on the right, where when there is a new version that we want to implement, we have different sheets, like you could see there, the login page or the dashboard, and we try to understand, okay, what is each of the functions? If you log in, then what must it do? We write it all up. Phil told us that actually that is available from Oslo, so we will be helping them testing a little bit more. But we then have at least a number of users, including some of our provincial users are testing these functionalities, and then we would And so we don't just test the new functionalities, we test existing and new functionalities. It's very important for us that whatever has worked before does not break when we upgrade. So we would delay an upgrade if there's a serious bug that we know that we had before. Then we have quite a stringent change management process for implementing those upgrades, that we confirm that the testing has happened, what is the changes that would be affected for users, and then we create a quick user guide on the changes, comparing the previous version that they were using and the existing version. So change management is also a key focus for us in terms of, so we have 3 risk categories: low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And then we would have specific criteria, like if it is a low risk, say it's a staging of development instance and we just need to replace that, it's a low risk and we just create a ticket and it gets done. But if there is any changes to a production version, we classify that as either medium or high risk, and there is certain levels of approvals that is required for that, including a risk, impact assessment, and a rollback plan if that change that we effect is not successful. And then you can see here is just a process flow of our change management. Essentially, I'm not going to go through all of it, but it's creating a ticket, testing, then creating a change request that gets approved, and then a change notification gets sent out. The change is affected, and if it is successful, a change notification is issued. If it's unsuccessful, we follow the rollback plan. Incident management. You know, I always think of the Swiss cheese issue. When you have an incident, it's not because one thing went wrong, but actually the issue went through many loopholes that happens that should not have happened, and eventually that incident then happens. So we have these processes, including our change management and other aspects that sort of we try to, we obviously deal with the incident as it happens, but we also try to prevent those incidents. So on incident management, it's really things like a server just being unresponsive or slow or completely falling over, and we just immediately respond to that by restarting it or something like that. But then to also take that step further to say, okay, so if this happened once, it's maybe not so serious. If it happens every week, what are we doing to prevent that from continuing to happen? Do we need to increase resources on the server and so on? Other incidents that we are following, so those are more server-based incidents, and others are cybersecurity incidents or threats, vulnerabilities that is identified, or data breaches that could happen on our systems. If we had any of those, we would declare an incident and evaluate and investigate that incident, write an incident report, and write strengthening mechanisms to prevent that incident from happening again. So it's important for us to ensure that we manage our you know, both our server incidents to have as much uptime as we can, and ensure that we have cybersecurity measures in place, because we consider it not about if you get hacked, but when you will have an incident. So we need to be vigilant for that. Then we have a training program for DHIS2 experts or superstars. Essentially, this is a 2-year program that we have implemented for training super users. We found that a 5-day course is not really training someone to the extent of someone who has worked with DHIS for a year or 2. You cannot build that capacity in a 5-day academy training or something like that. So we enrolled 18 participants from the 9 provinces in South Africa and the national level. into this program. It included face-to-face training, online training through a e-learning platform that we have, assignments that we then ask them to perform, which are graded. And if they are not passing those assignments, we give them exercises on a training instance that helps them to exercise that thing more in terms of, and basically we're teaching them the good principles that are followed here, that we have, not just how to create a data element, but how to create it properly, for instance. So, and then they have the ability to redo those assignments, and they have a period of mentoring by that HISP data manager, and then we hand that function over to them over time. So then they could continue doing that while we also continue to mentor and supervise them further. So the lessons learned really is defining good practices, testing of war changes as required, and change management and incident management. And over the few years, we've been able to really distribute these lessons and to countries around us, Lesotho, Namibia. I know Maria is online on Zoom. Hi, Maria. And also Zambia, that was going to be here, but I don't think they have arrived yet. So, and we've also been able to learn from them in South Africa again. So now I'll just share a few slides on rapid assessments that we have done for maximum value from DHIS2 in Zambia. We are working on a project called E4H with MSI in Zambia, and really the aim of our work, the one aim of our work there is to help them strengthen their HMIS in Zambia. And from the rapid assessment, there were a few recommendations. The data DHIS2 integrity checks cleanup, to implement consistent naming conventions, to align the HMIS on the minimum data set in the M&E framework, and effective utilization of DHIS2 artifacts such as groups that could make their reporting easier. This all is still in a process of getting effected, but some of it has already been done, and there is some dashboards were changed, and it resulted in a better structured reporting framework for the country. So they also agreed to implement some of the best practices. We developed guidelines for data management. Okay, it's just a few slides. User management, principles of defining data elements and indicators, organization unit guidelines, and we assisted them to implement a master facility list, that we applied the principles from the org unit guidelines, standardization of naming conventions, aided in systematic process of creating and closing facilities, and it's also being used as a master across all systems in use. So here you could just see some of the lessons learned. We were able to apply best practice to the unique environment, adjusting as required, and the Ministry of Health has internal capacity and skills to manage their own instance. They are committed towards DHIS2 and proud of owning the systems. However, they do have a shortage of resources to give adequate attention to detail. Change management is dependent on buy-in and teamwork, additional collaborative work to continue strengthening the DHIS2 implementation in Zambia. And something that really we did there is to use the bottleneck analysis and the action tracker apps that we could take back to other countries now, is to enhance the planning cycle and feedback. So just a few acknowledgements to the Ministries of Health and the funders that in the countries that mentioned in this presentation. And that is just, if you wanted to contact us at all, a little bit about HISP. Thanks. Sorry, I just finished.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Elmarie, Melissa, for great presentation. You know, it's not only about what's in the system, but as you can see that there's a lot about process, standard operating procedures, and I think HISP South Africa has really done a lot of great work there. I mean, I think we've all come a long way. We're not really in the days anymore of, you know, having root access to the database. I won't name any names, but I do have a co-conspirator sitting in the room where, you know, it was a little bit of the Wild West before, when, you know, you went in, you created a data element, you didn't really think a whole lot about what the potential consequences of that were. But 10 years down the road, you see that the decisions that you made may have big consequences, basically. And so with, you know, with time and with maturity, with changes to DHIS2, we all see that there's really a need for better standard operating procedures, as well as better tools to help us maintain the quality of the metadata over time. So we have like 10 minutes left. We can take questions for any of the presenters. See if we can grab a mic so that everybody on Zoom can hear. Anybody want to get us started? Yep. No. While you're thinking, maybe I did want to come back to, let's see if I can share. Oh, sharing. I can share my screen.
I'm not sure if that's.
I did want to come back to one of the questions that was asked earlier about running these metadata integrity checks on legacy databases, things that are before. I think this is in the presentation from Olav. I didn't go too much into the technical details of this. But in the GitHub, we have organized this kind of according to theme, if you will. And each of these contain a YAML file, which is YAML is not markup, ain't markup language, or yet another markup language, depending on who you believe. But YAML is basically like a kind of relatively human readable form of JSON. So if you do have a legacy database, you might be able to run this. So you can kind of clip these out, put it into an SQL view, or run it against the database. Don't run it on production. Obviously on a testing server. A lot of these will work because there haven't really been any changes to the model over time. Some of them will, some of them won't. But like I said, you know, we started with 236 and we'll maintain it. But we have run these against older databases. So a lot of these checks could work on legacy systems, and it could be a good idea to try. If you have some SQL skills, you could also probably modify these if they're not working. And one of the reasons that you might want to do that is because as you upgrade, the system may become more strict about what's valid and what's not valid. A good example of that is the organization unit geometries. So in previous versions, you could kind of put anything you wanted into that geometry field. It was just text. It didn't really have any impact. Now it's like a defined post-GIS geometry type. And if that geometry is not valid, then you won't be able to upgrade your system. So if you're thinking about upgrading to later versions of DHIS2, then determining, you know, which of these checks are important and running those against your legacy system might be smart. But yeah, you could give it a try. They probably will work. Not all of them will, but most likely many of them will. Yeah.
Oh, just a question. Is there any kind of identifier for each of the tests that you are running? So
Identifier?
yeah, so we can share. There is issues in request 1, 2, 3, or whatever. Or not yet?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong computer. Yeah, so if you go to this is really the best GitHub ticket I've seen, I think, in terms of documentation. But it may be inside of here. I mean, with this new API endpoint, you could say, give me all the integrity check for program rules. There's also more complicated filtering about give me this particular data integrity check. Is that what you mean?
I mean, the data integrity check, the ID is the name, or you have something different?
The first tab, basically, there is no ID, no. Tab you have?
I'm pretty sure actually that I would have to read the documentation, but I do think so, that it is possible to run a single integrity check. I have to look at the documentation, but I think the answer is yes. I have to consult the documentation about this, but I'm pretty sure it's possible now to run a specific check instead of, run all of these or run a group. I'm pretty sure that was implemented, but we can double check on that.
Is there a list in the documentation of all the parameters that we could use there? So program rules, programs, etc.
I think so. Yeah. I haven't seen it in the documentation, and if we're missing something, then it's there. But I believe it's documented, both in this ticket as well as the documentation. If something's missing there or if it's not clear, let us know and we can update it.
Yeah, one or two quick comments. Can I avoid having that? You can hold it to me.
Actually not, because people
on Zoom.
Yeah. Just with regard to integrity checks, DHIS 1, we had user definable integrity checks. I asked DHIS 2 core group to implement that, I think 5, 6, 7 years ago. Never happened, should actually happen, and the ability to run individual ones. It should actually be there. So, but that was not my main point. My main point was to the question of if you have a database that has gone out of control. Now, South Africa is a special case because we fully rolled out in 2000, and for the first 10 years, basically, I kept control of the implementation because we were using Microsoft Access. We were distributing the databases on DVDs, updates, and whatever, and it allowed the HISP group, particularly me, to ensure a reasonable degree of control. From about 2010, the national department shifted. They had some new management in. They were not so focused on telemedicine and the pies in the sky anymore. They were definitely also realizing that these big, what I the other day called the megalomaniac options, this idea of super systems that you roll out anywhere, they had seen that that didn't work in the UK, in Canada, in Norway, and many other places, right? So they started actually engaging much more active. And that's when the standard operating procedures come in. That's when the policy of having 2 yearly reviews and that changes had to be signed off by the Director General, etc., right, started coming in. So they took control over that change process. And that is the best way. Don't let your databases get out of control. I worked in another country the last 4 or 5 years, and it's taken me 3 years to work with them to clean up their mess. And as an example, again, of being preventative, Nora, my colleague, and I, we walked into the main sort of office there in October 2019. Another techie guy from Oslo had been there assisting them, setting up a lot of new data sets. But he's a techie. He had no idea what the hell stuff was all about. Nora and I came in and we were just horrified because the desks were covered with these huge registers and stuff. And we said, you cannot implement this. And Nora then spent 14 days. They basically bought into that. She spent 14 days negotiating with all the health programs and cut down the number of data items they wanted to collect from 13,000 to just over 1,000. And that tells you if they had gone the route of trying to collect 13,000, they would have had an even worse mess. But when I've been cleaning up, this is also, I need to say this, right? Because a lot of the problems are coming from so-called DHIS2 experts with a pure technical background who do not understand data. They have no experience with data management, with using data. I'm not saying they're bad people, but they have their understanding, which is technical, right? We're going to set this up in this or that way, and et cetera, et cetera. And when I looked through, I could see who had been causing the mess over the years. And I knew all of them, right? From my friend Lars here and down the whole list. And the problem is that each and every one of them are not bad people, but they come in with their own way of doing things. So you have 14 days to this one, 14 days to that one. I'm just saying here.
As usual, I'm going to have to cut you short.
I know, that's fine. I'm just saying here that it might take you 2 or 3 years to actually clean up a really bad database. But what you need to do is to ensure that you control the changes from them. And for that, I think you need a review every 2 years.
Thank you, Kalle.
Thanks.
Thank you. One last comment, then all of us have to go outside for the picture. Phil?
Hi, yeah, can you hear me? So you mentioned talking about setting up from scratch. You kind of advised maybe using scripts and so on instead of the UI. And I just wondered whether that meant you think configuration as code is a good option to try, like an ideal to try and follow.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of my feelings, right? And I think it's going to depend on every single implementation, right? I don't think that there's a problem, and it's probably advisable to use the UI in many situations, but not in production. So I think the ability to use the constraints of the UI simplifies a lot of things. But then moving that to a testing machine, moving that to the production instance, I think that's what's recommended. Scripting everything really requires much more sophistication, and in many cases you lose the validation of the user interface, which is also not desirable. We got to go outside for a picture. One last comment, Nick.
Just to add to Jason's comment, yes, I agree. When you're in this exercise, scripts and things can be very useful, but you don't want to kind of minimize the contributions of others entirely, right? So once you get into that regular routine, hopefully, where things are more controlled, you can maybe think about reverting back, using the user interface for some things, right? So just kind of think about that separation a little bit. Thanks.
Not mine. I'll add the couple of slides that everything will be.